Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, so what if the only way to save your creative soul was to convince the entire world that you were dead? Well, today, we're diving into the incredible story of a poet who did exactly that. We're going to explore the journey of ELIXIR, a celebrated poet who, he had everything, he lost it all, and then he found it again in the most unbelievable way. All right, so our story kicks off with the poet ELIXIR right at the absolute peak of his success. He's just published this masterpiece, Dünya-i Husn, which translates to the world of beauty.
Fame, wealth, you name it, it all followed. His name was literally on everyone's lips. But behind all that applause, a very, very different story was starting to unfold.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the contrast here. Publicly, he's the king of poetry, right? But privately, he was actually terrified. He had this deep-seated fear that love and real human connection, which he called this colorful, deadly serpent, would poison his creativity and destroy his art. So, trying to escape all the noise of his own fame, ELIXIR runs for the mountains. He's planning to write his next big book, Nayrang. But instead of finding inspiration, he finds nothing, just this terrifying, empty void. And his creative decline wasn't just a slump. It was this relentless downward spiral. It starts with inspiration just vanishing. Then that turns into real frustration. He tries traveling, but that doesn't help. Soon, his entire life just feels like, in his own words, a dry desert with absolutely no freshness or interest left. So completely convinced that his artistic life was over, ELIXIR makes a truly shocking decision. He decides he's going to make that death a reality for the whole world to see.
Yep, he sends a notice to the newspapers, and while the entire country explodes in mourning for their great lost poet, he becomes a ghost, just watching his own legacy play out from the shadows.
And to his, amusement, he discovers the newspapers have these wild imaginations. They're just inventing all these dramatic and completely false details about him, painting him as this tortured soul. And he's just reading it all with this weird, detached feeling.
But here's what he was really interested in: the critical analysis of his work. And honestly, he found it so disappointing, just shallow. It was all critics who could pick apart a line of poetry, but had no clue about the soul behind the work.
And then, one day, sitting in a library, everything changes. He stumbles upon this small journal with an analysis of his work so deep, so profound, it felt like an actual miracle.
This wasn't just another review. Asha, she understood his work with an empathy and a depth that no one else had ever shown. He knew right then and there, he just had to find her.
See, here was the true critic he'd been searching for his whole life. So he tracks her down, and this man, who the entire world believes is dead, confesses everything.
I mean, can you even imagine her shock, her disbelief? But as he told her his story, her skepticism just melted away, and it was replaced by this profound connection, a connection that was about to change his life forever.
In Ayesha, ELIXIR found so much more than just an intellectual equal. He found the muse who had completely reawakened his artistic soul. And he has this huge realization. All these feelings, the longing, the hope, the connection he'd been so afraid of, they weren't some poison to his creativity. They were the very fuel it needed to burn.
And this kicks off this incredible creative rebirth. Over the next 6 months, his artistic power came roaring back with the force of a tidal wave. His pen, which had been silent for so long, suddenly couldn't be stopped.
And the transformation in his work, it was just stunning. You see, his first book was like a beautiful but closed bud, a work of pure intellect, written from the mind. But his new, final book, Nayrang, which means the spectacle, it was something else entirely. Born from his love for Aisha, it was a fully blossomed flower, written directly from the soul.
So in the end, the Amrat, this mythical elixir of life he was unknowingly searching for, it wasn't fame, it wasn't solitude, it was the love that breathes life back into a silent heart. And that leaves us with a question, right? What kind of cage, I wonder, might we be trapping our own creativity in?